Hi guys, welcome to another history video here for Mr. D'Amico History. Glad you guys are here. I miss you guys all so much. Wish we could be together. Wish times were different, but keep on doing what you guys are doing. Keep on working hard. So far, so good. You guys have done awesome. Things around the world seem to be getting better. So, we'll take one day at a time. Again, just keep doing what you guys are doing. Keep reaching out if you guys need anything at all. And, just continue to make the best of the situation. It's tough for everybody. So, we're all, your teachers, I don't know how much they tell you it, but we're all really proud of you. And we mean that, for having to deal with these really, really difficult circumstances and this online learning and stuff. And again, you guys are doing great. So hope you had a great spring break. Not sure what you guys did. Not sure what, I'm sure nobody did anything too crazy. Probably a lot of sleeping, a lot of Netflix, a lot of social media, video games, and all that stuff. But, hope you guys relaxed and had a good time. But right now we're back to work. So what is today? Today is Tuesday. So you guys will see the video on Wednesday, the 15th. So the marking period ends on this Friday, technically. It ends on the 17th. So pretty much a couple more days, 2 or 3 more days of online instruction, and then we'll be wrapping up the third marking period and then continuing the fourth with the online stuff that we've been doing. But just know that we're wrapping up. So, for most of your classes, including mine, you guys will only have a couple grades left. But, again, a lot of your grades are right where they are. Check your grade book. Okay, guys? Be on it. Be organized. I tell you this all the time. Some of you have already done it, but reach out to me and ask me, if you're confused about an assignment that you might be missing or why your grade is what it is. A lot of your grades are really good, but some of you guys are missing some work. So just check on it and, see any missing assignments you guys have, reach out. I'll give you some opportunity to make it up. But, for the most part, guys, like I said, you just keep doing what you're doing. I know it's a whole new world, this online learning. It's new for me too, but, let's keep up the good work here. How's my hair look, guys? I don't know. I think maybe for my next video, I'm just going to have me giving myself a haircut on screen, and we'll see how it comes out. I know you guys are probably like, oh, your hair looks normal, but I feel like it's so long. I don't know. And I know I didn't wear a shirt and tie. I know some of you guys requested it, but I'm going with the comfortable at home look. But yeah, that's it. I hope, wish we could have a conversation. We actually might be able to go live pretty soon. So the district is releasing a way for us to do some sort of a live interaction where we can maybe do it once a week going forward. I still have to look into some of the details. I know it was somewhat against policy, so we're going to stick to whatever the district's policy is on going live. But it might be something that we can do going forward, and we can, somewhat meet face to face in a group setting. But other than that, guys, again, I miss you so much, and let's keep rolling. Let's keep going on this on our curriculum and what we need to learn. So today's going to be our last segment, our last part of all the different reform movements of the early 1800s. We're getting closer and closer to that Civil War. I don't need to go a whole review from last class like we did in our last video, but we're in the early 1800s, and we're seeing that America is changing, tremendously. All these different movements. Think about it in your head right now. List as many as you can. Right? What are all these different movements? What are these different reforms that are in this age of reform? What are some of them? What's changing? So education's changing. Temperance movement is changing, in terms of trying to outlaw and ban alcohol. The prison reform, women's rights. I think I said education, right? Education. Abolition we're going to talk about today, which is basically abolishing or getting rid of slavery. You guys did some of the work on that today on Tuesday. So just America's just changing at this time tremendously, so much. So this is going to be one of our last sections where we start to talk about abolition and how slowly but surely, movements have to start somewhere, right? Any historical movement has to start somewhere. Starts really small with a couple really brave, great abolitionists, these great thinkers, these daring, bold people that strove to make change. And some of them were not Africans. Some of them were not African Americans. Some of these people were white. Some of these people were white women. So it was a whole bunch of very, very diverse pool of people getting involved in this abolition movement. But again, what this whole chapter is about is how America is expanding and growing and how it's slowly changing over time, right? So let's go to the PowerPoint here. So I'm going to break this video up into a couple of days because I know whenever I do a video, or you guys know me whenever I'm in class too, they kind of last a while. So I'm going to, if this lasts long, no problem. We'll divide it up into a couple of days. We'll make it worth your while. We'll take care of a couple different lessons here, but just by doing the video. So move me around here. Hey, there I am up there. Okay. I even got my Mr. D'Amico mug today. I'm trying to really feel like I'm teaching again in person. Oh, I miss it. Mr. D'Amico mug. A little bit of my coffee. All right. So again, today we're going to do the abolition movement. What is abolition? Define what abolition is. Abolition is abolishing, removing, slowing, eventually stopping this idea of slavery. Okay. Now, before we actually talk about, today's lesson and get really into, American slavery, I found this picture online, really, really interesting. Back to, many, many years ago, this was actually from ancient Rome, about 200 or 300 AD. And when you think of slavery, let me ask you this, the idea of slavery. Close your eyes, think about it. What do you picture? What group of people do you picture? Who's enslaving who? What's going on? Why? When? What time period? What do you picture when somebody brings up, slavery? What are some of the ideas? Was slavery started in America? Was it started before then? After? So think about it. And I want to start to talk about some of these points with you guys, just about slavery in general. Now, the idea of slavery, you could also try to define it. Is slavery forced labor? Is slavery forced work? Is slavery forcing someone against their will to do something? Is it, there's so many different definitions and forms. But realize that slavery did not start in the Americas. It wasn't even close to starting in just the Americas. Slavery is the idea of slavery, the idea of forcing it's crazy, forcing other human beings to do something while you threaten their lives, while you maybe torture them or threaten them or hold them against their will, has been around since the very, very start of history, even way, way, way before this stone painting, which again was in Rome about 2,000 years ago. Slavery, according to a lot of historians, goes back almost to 10,000 BC, to the oldest civilizations you could think of, ancient Egypt, ancient Mesopotamia. Slavery has been something that has just been around. It's existed for all of time. It's been a staple of the world. I mean, we're going to talk later, does slavery still exist today? And some people might argue yes, other people might argue no. But slavery is something that has been around for a really, really long time, even back to wars. When there were wars fought, thousands of years ago, even back to a couple hundred years ago, what would the winners of war do with the losers? They could kill them. They could put them in prison. They could torture them. But some of those smart, even though it might not be morally correct, right? Some of those thinkers, some of those war generals and politicians and leaders, they would take their enemies that they just defeated in war and push them into slavery. Okay. Slavery goes back. You could even talk about some of the Native Americans when the Europeans came over. What do they do to the Native Americans? So I think a lot of people have that misconception, and we think slavery, it's the Atlantic slave trade. It's the Middle Passage. It's Africans coming over against their will to the South and to South Carolina and to maybe Central America and to this and working on farms. Yeah, sure. That's more modern slavery, but just realize that slavery has been something since ancient China, ancient Greece, ancient Rome. There's a lot of, historical information that says the Egyptians might have forced slaves to build the pyramids. Apparently Vikings, and remember Leif Erikson, who we talked about last year a lot, apparently they had slaves that they came over with. There's just tons. You can go online. There's so many examples from history about slaves and slavery. The conquistadors, when they came over, Hernando Cortez, Fernando Pizarro. These guys all had slaves. Think about it. It's not just cheap labor, it's free labor. So a lot of societies all across history have enslaved, white people, black people, Asians, Native Americans, every ethnicity. There's been so many examples across history. So I just kind of wanted to emphasize that and discuss that with you guys before we get into like the American slavery idea. Okay. And how many of you guys have ever heard somebody say, "Oh, it's always been like that. So let's just keep it that way." Oh, we've always done it that way. Why do you guys do? Oh, that's the way. That's tradition. That's the way. That's just how we've always done things. I want you to think about how dangerous that line can be. Okay. These abolitionists that are going to start to remove slavery, there was people that obviously are going to be against the abolitionists that still want to support slavery. But there were people in history in America, around the world, that said, well, what's wrong with it? Maybe we're not treating these people right, but it's always been that way, right? That's been a staple of the world forever. So it's a dangerous way to think, because if you say, oh, it's always been like that, that's how it's always been, that can be really, really dangerous, because with that line, with that thought process, with that ideology, you'll never progress as a society or as a world, as a world society too. Okay. So that's just a little bit of older, information, just a little background about, slavery itself. And, just give you a little bit of background information where we're coming from here. Okay. Okay, I'm going to really quickly, guys, this is our map. You guys did a good job on it. You're crushing this. I'm going to put this over, we'll put this over North America, my face. If you guys even want to see me, I don't know. I'll just leave myself up here. I'm having a good time with this. So this is one of the maps you guys looked at yesterday. And this is now we're getting to be more modern. Yes, 1650 to 1860 is not necessarily modern, but it's certainly more modern than the examples we talked about, like Egypt, Mesopotamia, and then more recently the conquistadors. But this map here shows you, I asked you what the title was. I'm just going to go over some of the answers from yesterday. So this is the title, with slave trade. You guys did an awesome job of this first thing. It's like, right, it seems simple, but so many people don't do it, and you guys have learned, and I'm so proud of you for it. You're learning how to use maps, and you're showing me your skills. So the title, slave trade from Africa to the Americas. So that, boom, right there tells you what all of this is, right? It's the slave trade from, one of the questions was what part of Africa? It's Western Africa to the Americas. And the Americas are not just the United States of America, right? The America would be North America, South America, including Central America, what we call the West Indies. So this shows you from a matter of how many years? 210 years. Shout out to Sean, by the way. Sean, period 910. He's like, by the way, Mr. D'Amico, you didn't put the right answer. You didn't put the right number of years for the multiple choice. I counted this as 190. So I think the quarantine's getting to me a little bit here, but actually it's 210 years. So thanks, Sean, for pointing that out. But over the span of 210 years, it shows you the number of slaves that are kidnapped, stolen, taken, chained up, put on slave ships, taken across the Atlantic Ocean, the Atlantic slave trade, participating in the Triangle Trade and what is overall generally known as the Middle Passage in a matter of 210 years. And how many slaves approximately was it? Some of you guys might have had a tough time finding this. You just had to read. It was down here. So in that matter of 210 years, 10 to 15 million enslaved people were transported from Western Africa to the Americas. Okay. Now, again, another misconception. I'm trying to clear as many misconceptions as I possibly can. The United States of America, what for half of this time on this map was the 13 colonies, not even America, right? The British colonies, they're just a drop in the bucket. What's the number? What's the total number of slaves sent to the current United States? It's only 0.5 million. Now listen, 500,000 people is a tremendous and detrimental amount. That's an incredible amount. But comparatively to the rest of the Americas, right? 0.5 out of the 10 to 15 million people. So it's not just Africans going to our current United States, right? Or the 13 colonies. Some were even shipped to Europe. Almost just as many were shipped to Europe. But the majority of them were sent to South America. 5 million people to South America, specifically near Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, and then a lot as well to the West Indies. That would be, like where the Bahamas is, that's where Columbus landed, right? Some of those islands in there that you could think of, Cuba, Dominican Republic, that would be like what the West Indies would be. But just another thing, slavery across history is not just Africans going to the North America, right? This is just a small, tiny percentage of what the overall world slave trade has been. So I thought this was really interesting. And then you guys could see some of the different work that these slaves did. Some of the different, there were domestic slaves that worked in houses. There were ones who farmed. There were ones who, even some that might have worked in shops or done different things for their owner, whatever their owner, it's crazy to say that, right? Owner had them do. But you guys can see specifically in where we would, work closest to in North America and in the United States of America currently, what were some of the crops? What were some of the farms? What were some of the different things that they helped to cultivate and to farm? You see this symbol here, which would be tobacco. Tobacco was a huge one. Remember tobacco? Here's a question. Was tobacco founded in the New World or the Old World? It's the New World. Who remembers the man? This is the bonus question. Who remembers the man who brought tobacco to the colony of Jamestown? John Rolfe. Okay, but tobacco was a huge cash crop, tons of money off it. Cotton was a really big one. Cotton, we talked about cotton last class a little bit. Rice, and then if you go a little bit more to the south, into Central America, into where Mexico would be, you need a little bit hotter weather for things like sugar, which actually there's some sugar growing in the New Orleans area and in the West Indies, but sugar, coffee. So you can see some of the different things that that slaves were put to work with. Okay, so that was map 1. And this is map 2 that we looked at last night. And this shows you the triangle trade. So this is over a little bit wider of a span of years, 1451 to 1870. And it just shows you what, again, where the slaves were typically sent to against their will and some of the things that slaves were traded for, right? This wasn't just, white ship owners and company owners riding their boats into Africa and going and capturing them themselves, okay? This was a slave trade. What do you need for a trade to happen? You need two sides to come together and transfer items. I will give you this for this. Reminds me of when we used to trade like baseball cards or Pokemon cards or trade whatever. It's not just stealing. That would be called stealing, right? This is the triangle trade system. So actually there was a lot of African, we talked about this a little bit. It's crazy that some African kings and leaders would actually, they would live on the west coast of Africa, and they would have tons of money and wealth, and so much at their, at their feet that they can, so many resources, so many things that they could use. They would actually help enslave their own people. And what would they get out of it? You guys answered this question. Sometimes they would get rum. Rum was a very popular drink. They would get manufactured goods sent down from Great Britain. They would get guns out of it. I mean, it was this whole intricate, incredibly interesting trade network. And, tobacco was involved. Obviously, we said slaves were involved. Rum, it was like a big factory, right? Where Africa supplied the workers for the factory, right? This is where in North America and in South America and in Central America, that is like where they, that would be like, the work floor in the factory where they're going to get the raw materials, and then they were sent over to Europe a lot of the time to be finalized, to be put into, they would send their cotton to Europe to make it into shirts and to make it into all these different things. They would send wood and all these, so many different products over to Europe, and they would finalize them and then, send out the finalized products. So it was this huge intricate system that we call triangle trade that we've went over a bunch of times. Okay. And then lastly on this map here, you can see the total number imported. Obviously, You could see some different numbers here. This one says 9.5 million. There's the one before, if you remember, said 10 to 15. So it's tough to always get an exact estimate, especially the further you go back in history. But we're generally close, and it seems that these two maps agree on around 10 million. And remember, a lot died as well coming over, which is really tragic and really sad too. But you could see the biggest piece of the pie here would be the Caribbean islands, which is, Dutch, owned by Dutch, the Netherlands, French, and British, which would be, basically, that's what the West Indies was before. Portuguese, Brazil. Remember, South America at this time period in the 1800s, a little bit earlier actually, was controlled by two countries generally. What two countries controlled South America before this? The answer was Portugal and Spain. There was a line that went right here that cut Brazil off and gave Brazil to who? Portugal, and gave the rest of South America to Spain. That line was called the line of demarcation. But just understand that a lot of them were sent to this Portuguese colony of Brazil, and 2% even to Europe, to Asia, and then only 4%, like we said before, all of those slaves, only 4% sent to the American colonies. Okay, so that's just a little bit of a review of what we did yesterday. Now we're going to get some new information going here. All right, so let's move forward here. Okay, so you guys are going to be writing this down in your notebooks. I promise you it will help you tremendously later to keep all of these in your notebook. I'm not going to go crazy on notes since we're not in person and it's very different, but write this down in your note section. This is all that you're going to be doing for today. In terms of your notebook, is just to write, copy this down, and I promise you guys have my word, writing this down will help you so much going forward on any assessments we might have, and any quizzes, any tests, and it's going to help you very much to learn it too. So let's write these down. And just like normally in class, as you guys are writing, I'll supplement it. I'll give you guys some background information with it. I'll put my face above the blue star here. So now we're going to talk about, this new topic, which is the crusade for abolition. A crusade is a change. It's when it's a large group of people trying to make a change. And abolition is trying to remove slavery. So our first point here is these reformers, very, very daring, believe the institution of slavery should come to an end in the United States. Now, there's always been people, before the early 1800s, there were tons of people in the United States, in the 13 colonies and then the eventual United States, that believed that slavery was immoral, that it was terrible, that it should be outlawed, that it had no room, we had no room for it in society. Going back to some of the first people that came here, the Quakers who came to America, the Quakers, the Pilgrims, some of those different people who came here for religious tolerance and for political tolerance, or religious freedoms. But those were some of the first people that spoke out against slavery. And those were some of the first, not necessarily abolitionists, but people that felt strongly against it. But, just like anything else, there's strength in numbers, right? There's always, the more people that you have, the more, power behind the movement, and the more, information, the more literacy that's out there about it, the more people will get involved, and the larger effect that it will have, and the larger scale change that it will have, right? But, in the beginning of America, there really wasn't enough behind the abolition movement to really make enough noise. But there were people in America very early that were very against it. Even a lot of the northern states, as we know, obviously, I'm going to show you a map pretty soon, New Jersey, New York, they were, at this time, there's roughly 25, 26, 27 states. It was half and half. Remember the Missouri Compromise, where you needed Missouri to come in as a slave state and Maine to come in as a free state. It was about half and half. So all those, even the northern states, abolished slavery. But there was still not this huge abolition movement that we're going to get into, where there's people trying to make a change, not only where they live, necessarily in the North, but in the South as well. They want to not only bring changes to their own lives, but to the lives of others in the country and eventually around the world too. Now, the founding document, the greatest breakup letter ever, the Declaration of Independence, one of the most famous lines in that is that, it says it right here, all men are created equal. Written what year? 1776. The main author was Thomas Jefferson. How many people signed it? 56. Where was it written? Philadelphia. What were the three unalienable rights in it? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But the main part, one of the main, the main verbiage in it, one of the most famous lines of all time, all men are created equal. It says it right there. All people, it doesn't say people, right? But men are created equal. So a lot of these abolitionists looked to the founding document, the Declaration of Independence, and said, wait a minute, that says we're all equal. So how can, if we look at this picture on the right here, it says, am I not a man and a brother? All men are created equal. And how is it that this man is treated like an animal in chains and is put into slavery? So, a lot of these very famous abolitionists that we're going to get into, David Walker, Frederick Douglass, these two sisters called the Grimke sisters, and tons of others. There's going to be about 200,000 people involved in the abolitionist movement by about 1840, 1850. That's a lot of people, especially that America's population wasn't as big. They turn to that founding document, the Declaration of Independence, and they say, well, that's not right. That doesn't make sense. All men are created equal. We're a country of democracy, of equality. Well, does this picture look like equality and democracy to you? And you go back at even women. Did women have many, many rights? No. So all men are created equal. No disrespect to our founding fathers, but did that really mean all men are created equal? No, it really actually meant all white males that own land that were born here. Actually, not that we're born here, but all white males that are property owners are equal. So that's, think about it, right? That's a flaw right there that a lot of the abolitionists saw. Okay. So one of the first groups was, this is really interesting, called the American Colonization Society. Their first idea was that in America itself, in North America, in the United States of America, there was never going to be a place where Africans and, Americans or Caucasian, were black and white, could live together. So their first idea was that they would ship any Africans that are in the United States back to Africa, to a new free society in a country called Liberia at the time. And there was posters, there was all this information that say, hey, we'll send you back and we'll let you be free there. But is that really, think about it, is that a long-term solution? Just to start to send Africans back? And, would these people want to go back? Would they want to take that dangerous long trek back to start a new life over? I mean, maybe that'd be better than being a slave. But this organization, this group, the American Colonization Society, wanted to send people back to Africa. But again, there had to be a better solution, right, than just sending these enslaved Africans back to get their, freedom in a new place, right? So that's maybe a short-term solution. And actually, did it even work? No. There was only about 1,400 or 1,500 people Africans that actually wound up going to Liberia, to Africa. So it was actually very, very unsuccessful, it does say that here. But that was like the basis of the abolition. Like, we might not be able to get total freedom for Africans in America, so why not send these people elsewhere so that at least they can have their freedom? So this is the first sense of I guess you could say, equality and abolition to an extent, right? But people realized that there had to be another solution to this. There had to be another way that we can make America, equal, and that all people, all men and all people can truly be created equal, and that we can get rid of slavery instead of just shipping them off to Africa, back to Liberia, back to all these different places. Okay. So eventually it starts to, the abolition movement, it's just like anything, starts to grow. It's almost like, it's tough to compare the abolition movement to anything today. I mean, there's a lot of movements out there, right? There was, you could even talk about like the Black Lives Matter movement, which is slowly but surely growing and growing. And we see some information about that in the media and around, but it's tough to compare it to any movements from today. If you guys can think of any, let me know. But it's slowly, just like anything, changed. And by 1826, there were over 143 anti-slavery societies. And they're, a lot of their slogans were the same. They want to free their brothers in chains. Think about it. Look at this picture on the right, and how do you not feel terrible? How do you not feel awful looking at this and saying, does that person really deserve that? And remember, a lot of these people, a lot of these Africans were born into slavery. They were kids and they grew up on the plantations and they became slaves. Many of them were captured. I mean, obviously they're all going against their will. So they have no choice in the matter. So it's obviously the whole institution of slavery is disgusting and terrible. But slowly but surely, the point of this slide is to show you that it started to gain steam, some of the ideas of where it came from. And then again, by the early 1820 or by 1826, there was a lot of different societies all sprouting throughout. Obviously, where would they be? Would they be more towards the north of America or more towards the south? They'd be more towards the north, right? Since the South had the slaves and they didn't really want to change their society too much. So we saw a lot of these anti-slavery societies in states like New York. We saw Ohio. New Jersey had a handful of them. New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania had some. Massachusetts. So, typically the tri-state area, a little bit to the west of it, and a little bit to the north and the northeast of that as well. Okay. I wish I could give extra credit. I would say extra credit right now for whoever can tell me what this is a picture of. Where? What place? What colony? Starts with a J. The answer is Jamestown. So this shows you again, we talked earlier about slavery. This was the first successful American or colony in North America. From the European standpoint, Jamestown in the 13 colonies. There were even slaves brought here. So again, I just want to show you that slavery goes well further back than a lot of people realize. This was a very old poster from the early 1800s, a very early political cartoon that showed, this is the American Colonization Society showing you can have your freedom. You can go to Africa. This was the original idea that we're just going to send Africans to Africa so that they can have their freedom there. But a lot of them didn't even want to go. Like we said, they saw this and was like, really? I have to go there to get my freedom? Why can't we have freedom here? Okay. And then, okay. I'm going to ask you guys a couple questions about this pretty simple line graph here. Shows you the U.S. slave population from 1790 to 1860. So we're looking over a span of about 70 years. And you can see it slowly increases. I mean, if you guys remember, the total number of slaves, imported was about 500,000 or so. But you guys can see the number of slaves that were in America from its very start, from 1790, got about 600 or 700,000. And it just increases and increases and increases until 1860. If you want to be more specific, it'd be 1861, when eventually the Civil War is fought. So you can make predictions, right? Who knows? Maybe if the Civil War was fought later, 20, 30 years later, or maybe if it wasn't fought for a long time after, this curve would keep going up and up and up. So I'm going to ask you guys a couple of questions about this, maybe a couple of critical thinking questions, a couple, line graph questions on it. So check this out, analyze it, and you guys can just see that the population of slaves was growing tremendously, as well as the opposition to it, which we'll get into as we're going here. Abolition too. Okay. And here is a map from, who sees the year? What year? Map of the United States from 1850. Okay. So what are we looking at here? Green states are our free states, and the orange states are our slave states. So you can see a massive, growing split in our country. The North that had, a lot of these abolition movements, a lot of these abolition groups, like we said earlier, were in New York and in Ohio and in Pennsylvania, some a little bit out further west into Illinois. All of these states, slavery was illegal. Okay, this is where your abolitionists typically did a lot of their work, did a lot of their newspaper editing, did a lot of their propaganda. And obviously, as we know, these southern states where slavery was legal at the time, they were very against it. Just like, what else were they against? What other reform movement was the South against? Education. Because think about this. This is so significant. Sounds corny. Knowledge is power, right? The more that you educate somebody, if they are literate, they can read, they can write, they can think, they can understand, they can create solutions to problems, they can bring change, right? So the South was against new education that taught against abolition because they don't want their society to be changed. They want to keep things. What was that quote that we used in the very beginning, right? That's how it's always been. So that was at this time in the 1850s. Some might argue some states are still like that today. They're more of a that's how it's always been type of society. And it's interesting to see that. But you guys see, imagine our country was like this today. Imagine we had, half the states allowing slavery and the other half not. I mean, the tensions were just growing and growing in this huge melting pot of a nation, and eventually it was gonna, it was gonna bubble over, and the bubble was gonna burst, and that's what the Civil War would eventually be. But you guys can see just a massive growing split. And at this time, the American population itself, I think, was around 25 or 30 million people. So now it's about 10 times that, even more than that, actually. But, about 30 million people, and the slave population was about 400,000. So a really significant chunk of the entire America's population, although they didn't count in the South as people, although there was the 2/3 compromise, which we've discussed. But a lot of the population overall were slaves. Okay. And here's going to be our last part for the day. I wanted to show you guys this part. We'll do that tomorrow. I want to show you a little bit more about literacy. So why am I showing you this? Why am I showing you literacy? We talked about that, right? How knowledge is power, how it's really important to be able to read, to write, to understand. So most slaves that came over were illiterate. Most of them could not read, could not write, could not, they weren't taught to critically think or any of these things. So that, why do you think that is? So that they couldn't make changes, so that they couldn't strike back, so they couldn't publish or write about their terrible experiences, right? So literacy is a really, really important thing, and reading and writing and being able to think and all this stuff. It's so, so significant. So I just wanted to show you guys. This is really, really interesting. I'll show you this first. We take for granted being able to read and write, in 2020. Today, of the world population older than 15 years old, 86% are literate. What did it used to be? Check out this interactive map here. It's going to slowly take you across history. And I'm showing you this to show you that, again, why literacy is important. And I want you to pay very close attention across history to specifically Africa here. And we're going across history. So we have 1550, and it keeps going forward and forward. And these are the statistics, the numbers down here. So anything that you see is in white, is a general society of illiteracy. As the colors get darker and darker, more people can read, more people can write, more people are literate. So now we're in about 1650, and you can see that Europe is obviously a hotspot. That's where a lot of the world events were taking place, and the technology and the population. 1750. Skips to 1820. Sorry, I didn't think it was this long. I thought it would go a little faster. There we go, 1870. So now we see a lot of America, but it says 80% of America at this time, 83% in 1880. Still not a lot of data for Africa. You can see over time, more and more people around the world are becoming literate. Still, there we go, there's Europe again. Growing, growing, growing. And finally now, there's still, in 2015, if we went ahead all the way here, you still have some African countries that, are not, 14%, 24%. Point is, a lot of the people that were brought over during the slave trade were illiterate. They couldn't make changes. That's why this is going to transition us into the next class. There were a couple slaves that escaped that were literate, and a lot of them weren't able to live on and write about their stories and their experiences. But there's a really, really famous, popular man, and there's a bunch of them, but one named Frederick Douglass who escapes, and he is literate, and he's able to read and write and tell his story. So it's very, very important and very significant that these slave owners made sure that their slaves did not have access to books, to pens, to paper, so that they could not learn. Because if you can learn, you could think, you can make changes, you can revolt. If you never learn, you're not taught to think, you're not taught to do these things stay status quo, right? So that's the point of me showing you this literacy. And I think that is going to be it for part 1. All right, we made it. So I'm going to stop here. Next class, we are going to go and do some of the vocab. We'll move on to some of these other topics here. We're going to talk about some of these great thinkers, great abolitionists, David Walker, William Lloyd Garrison, Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, and we'll start to wrap up with the abolitionist movement, okay? So stay safe, stay well, keep crushing it, guys. If you have any questions, reach out. I'll post this, and that'll be it. So I miss you guys a lot. Have an awesome day, and we'll talk soon. Bye, guys.